I used to live in South Korea, specifically a small town called Samchuk. I was a teacher, and I spent a few years when I was younger teaching conversational English to students in other countries. While I was in Korea, my colleagues and my students told me their impressions of America. One teacher had concerns that America was not allowing South Korea to develop better weapons, potentially nuclear weapons, as a deterrent to North Korea. Another teacher commented on the difference between American and Korean values as it relates to the environment and family. In South Korea, or at least where I lived, recycling is mandatory. A lesson I learned after I was chastised for not following this strictly. Living in another country and listening to how others viewed my country was a sobering experience, and this came to mind when I rewatched The Host recently. The Host is a 2006 monster movie directed by joon-ho. On an American military installation in South Korea, an American doctor orders his Korean assistant to dump toxic chemicals down the drain. The assistant initially protests because it would end up in the Han River, but he eventually does what he is told. Years later, the chemicals have created a gigantic aquatic monster that lives in the sewers but soon terrorizes the locals. The monster steals a young girl. Her father and the rest of the family search for her in the sewers, all the while the authorities are chasing them. The American government has told the Korean government that the monster is spreading a virus, and anyone that came in contact with the monster must be quarantined and in some cases experimented on. There is no virus, but we will get to that later. After a long search, the family finds the girl, but it's too late. She has died. The family kills the monster in revenge, and the father adopts a young boy who was also taken by the monster but survived. So what does any of this have to do with America's relationship with South Korea? Well, Koreans undoubtedly know all of this, but a quick primer for others might be helpful. During World War II, Korea was under Japanese rule. Because of this, Japan's defeat was also Korea's defeat. America and the Soviet Union sought to administer the country, and it was split into two halves, with America administering the South and the Soviet Union administering the North. It's way more complicated than that, and a lot happened during the military administration from 1945 to 1948, but in short, that is why there are two Korean nations and why America continues to have a close military relationship with South Korea to this day. There are over 20,000 American soldiers stationed in South Korea today. They're part of the USFK, United States Forces Korea. For Koreans, the relationship is complicated as there is a desire among some for America's protection and anti-American sentiment among others due to their continued presence and previous support for men like Chun Do-hwan. In The Host, we see these fears about American interference and military presence in Korea in the form of the monster. When the American doctor orders the chemicals to be dumped down the drain, this is actually a recreation of a real-life incident and ecological controversy in 2000 in which the American military in Seoul dumped formaldehyde down the drain. When we see the American doctor ordering the Korean assistant, what we are really seeing is kind of a microcosm of the relationship between America and Korea. America is the great power, influencing the smaller power. The American doctor tells the Korean assistant what to do. Later in the film, America gives the Koreans a chemical called Agent Yellow to counteract the alleged virus caused by the monster, the titular host of the virus. Agent Yellow is a thinly veiled reference to Agent Orange, a herbicide that the United States military used in Vietnam as part of Operation Ranch Hand. It is most famous for its use in Vietnam, but you know where else America has used it? Korea. For example, it happened during the DMZ conflict in the late 60s, sometimes called the Second Korean War. As for Vietnam, their government says up to 3 million people suffered illnesses related to Agent Orange, and the Red Cross estimates about 1 million were disabled or suffered severe health problems, including damaging genes, deformities, cancer, and Hodgkin's lymphoma. In The Host, a virus is never actually confirmed, suggesting this was a purposeful lie by the United States or a supposition based on limited evidence. The film takes a shot at this when it references the Iraq War, in which the justification was also either a purposeful lie or a supposition based on limited evidence. In one scene, the grandfather says, "If the government says so, we have to accept it." South Korea's past impacts and haunts the film. Its history is that of internal division and military dictatorships, but also resistance against foreign powers. The film references historical events such as the student demonstrations of the 1980s, the frequent suicides in the Han River, and of course the American military presence in the country. I mean, I hate to explain the moral of the film in a way that The Twilight Zone would, like maybe the real sewer monster is America. But yeah, the real sewer monster is America, but also Korea's complicity. The monster represents a dual threat from both within the borders of Korea and the influence of a foreign power. While it is born from the recklessness of the United States military, it also draws out the tensions within the family and exposes their own failures. Put another way, America created the problem, but it has magnified pre-existing problems. The film is not simply anti-American. The director pushed back on that claim because it's so binary and lacks nuance. It's critical of America, which is, reasonable under the circumstances. The Host is a fascinating film because it's like watching a monster movie version of the history of post-World War II Korea. In addition to this, the film is also a picture of America from the perspective of a foreigner. This is American politics, made by a Korean director, taking place in Korea, but with actual Americans, and a monster that represents the consequences of American influence on Korea. There is some optimism in the film, though. Every character in the family has a deep flaw, but they use these flaws, this pain, to help defeat the monster. The grandfather doesn't know what he did to make his family so dysfunctional, so in his final act, he saves his family to make up for what he assumes was his fault. The father is lazy and irresponsible, but he becomes courageous in the end. He needs to be in order to save his daughter, even though it's in vain. The uncle is a drunk, so he uses Molotov cocktails to fight the monster. The aunt is an archer who never wins the gold, but she fires a flaming arrow into the eye of the monster. I don't think I would ever go back to living in South Korea. My time spent in other countries taught me just how American I am, and how accustomed I am to things being a certain way. My food, my clothes, my language. But I can visit Korea again through the movies, and no movie I have ever seen has been more emblematic of the culture, the politics, and the history of Korea like The Host. Hi everyone, if you like what I do, please click on the orange Patreon link below. That's how this show happens. It's also the only way to request an episode. Also, please like, share, subscribe, and click on the notification bell so that you never miss an episode. I'll see you next week.